We're in a series this month that I'm not trying to pretend like we have all the answers. Isn't that a bad way to start a sermon? But I want to be honest with you. We're talking about a subject that Job said this: man is a few days and full of trouble. If you have been around for more than a few years, you know that life gets complicated. There are times when life is so hard that it's hard to see sunshine for tomorrow. And as we talk about hope or being hopeful, please be careful that you do not hear me say there's an easy solution. There's not. But I do want to say this: as followers of Jesus Christ, those of us who choose to follow Jesus Christ, we are called to be people who have hope. God has done something so great for us that it should cause us to be able to raise our eyes up and say, in spite of what we're going through, we have hope. I want to say this. As we've talked about it, there is no 3 easy steps and you have hope. If it was that easy, I would have written the book and I would have sold it and I would be a millionaire and I wouldn't be sitting up here. Okay, that's probably not true. But the reality is there is no easy answers. However, God does give us ideas and he does tell us how we can begin to put hope or allow hope to be reflected in our lives. We've gone through several different ideas so far as we talk about beginning to build hope. And by the way, hope is like a muscle. It must be practiced. It must be used. If it is not used regularly, the opposite becomes our norm. But we began to say this: we are called to have hope, and as we begin to look at hope, there's some things that we need to begin to work on. And part of this is to begin to, number one, to determine or to define in your life what is truly most important. To be able to stop and to define in your life what truly matters. And I'm not talking about, hey, how do I get a nicer car? Or how do I get a little bit bigger boat? Those things are nice, and we're not discouraging you from getting that. What we're trying to say is, as nice as those things are, they never provide hope. They just give you another payment to make. But we begin to talk about this idea, we need to begin to define what really matters. Security. The idea of having the ability to have a secure relationship, both with your family and with God. The ability to define what really matters. The ability to stop and say, I think a future. The ability to see light for tomorrow. The next step. I need a next step. We all need to define what is really important to us. We then began to look at the idea that if we're going to define what's important to us, it begins to cause us to prioritize our life. Yes, I want the new car, but the new car is not the most important, so I'll stick that back 3 steps, and I'm going to focus on my date night with my wife. I'm going to focus on how do I make sure and you can fill in the blank. When you prioritize, when you define what is important to you, you begin to have hope because you can begin to prioritize your life in such a way that you allow hope to live. You can predetermine, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of this. I'm going to make margins in my life to make sure that this has room to grow. Last week we began to look at this idea that part of hope is doing community, both allowing yourself to have hope given to you and learn to be hope for other people. As a follower of Jesus Christ, we are called to do life with others. I'm going to move on today, and as I move on today, we're going to hit something that, as we talk about this, I guarantee you already know. The problem is what we know and what we practice sometimes struggles to align, doesn't it? So please, as we begin to talk about this, just understand I'm not here trying to talk down to us. What I'm trying to do is encourage us and remind us to live up to what we already do know. One of the realities that we need to keep in the back of our mind, that as a follower of Jesus Christ, we are called to live and act differently. Paul tells us in the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 12, Paul was writing a letter to the Romans, and for those who kind of are interested, the book of Romans was not specifically written to any particular church. Paul was writing it while he was in a Roman prison. Talk about having hope. And as he's sitting in the Roman prison, he's writing to Christians. And so the book of Romans is more of a lot of the other books that Paul wrote are letters to churches that were struggling, having problems, trying to correct problems. The book of Romans is more of a, hey, I want to stop and put your faith into context. And so he's writing to Christians or followers of Jesus Christ in general, and he writes in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, and he says this: don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, what is good and pleasing and perfect. We're told that as followers of Jesus Christ, one of the things that God desires for us is that our lives are changed by the way we think. Paul is going to remind us and we're going to look at this in just a second, but he's reminding us carefully that as a follower of Jesus Christ, hope is won and lost and where we already know, in how we think. And so Paul is saying, hey, don't be like everyone else. Allow your mind to be transformed or changed. Now, it's easy, and be like I say, I want to just be honest with you. The idea of talking about having hope on a Sunday morning when we're all sitting in here in an air conditioning place, and for a few minutes Craig plays some awesome songs, and we're all kind of thinking about God, and I mean, you see everybody else and everybody's looking good, and I mean, it's just a good few minutes. But the reality is this, is hope is not as easy as it is saying you need to have hope. If having hope was as easy as me saying you need to have hope, you would say I would take hope. The reality is this, is that we lose hope for many reasons, and there are real legitimate reasons why we begin to lose hope. So please, as we talk about this, let's just be honest for a few moments, because we have all experienced some of these things, and I'm going to just name a few things that you are probably dealing with now, or have dealt with, or you are going to deal with. These are not everything, but let's just be honest. We talk about losing hope, and by the way, you know probably one of the greatest reasons we lose hope, and I hate to say this, but we get tired. You ever get so tired that you just like, I can't even think square? I just, everything is, okay. I'm going to be honest. Some of us have brains that do not turn off at night. Now, it's easy. Someone say, hey, you're tired? Well, go get some sleep. You ever heard you say that? You ever talk to a Christian friend who you've been going through some really tough times, and I mean some real struggles, and they look at you and they say, well, you just need to have some faith? Thanks, that's a real help. If I could, I would. I don't. That's why I'm struggling. But there's a reality. Let's just be honest. We're going to struggle with hope because when you haven't slept very well in 2 weeks, I guarantee you nothing is hopeful. Number 2, you ever dealt with loss? Now, loss comes in many different forms, okay? I guarantee you, you've dealt with loss, and when you are in the middle of loss, hope is not easy. When you're in the process of your health is going, it's hard to look up and go, I've got hope. No, there's loss. When you lose a loved one, when a relationship breaks down, when you lose a pet, I mean, some of us get so attached to our pets, it's like losing family. When you lose a job, loss hurts. And in the middle of loss, there is no hope. There's a struggle. Loneliness? Anyone ever dealt with loneliness? Look, we can pretend all we want to, but the reality is that most of us struggle with building friendships that are more than saying good morning to someone at church on Sunday morning. Most people don't know the struggles that you're facing. And when we're lonely, where does hope lie? Ever been afraid? You ever gone through a situation where you are afraid, where I don't know where tomorrow, I know tomorrow's coming, and I've been through this situation before. I can see the writing on the wall. I don't know what to do. Fear comes legitimately and unlegitimately. I mean, you know, if you've been through it, you know. Some of you guys have had to deal with places of fear that I can't even imagine. I want to just deal with one more. This is not the all-inclusive list, but I just want to say I want to deal with one more because this is so important. We talk about hope and losing hope, and the reality is this: depression. We don't like to talk about it as followers of Jesus Christ because as followers of Jesus Christ, we're all supposed to have joy. But the reality is this, is that there is no hope when we deal with depression. And by the way, for those of you who've had to deal with depression, it is not simply a matter of, well, you know, something good's going to happen and it all is going to go away. It doesn't work that way. Depression sets in. You don't want to get up in the morning. There's no reason to get up in the morning. And once you get up in the morning, you don't want to go to work. I mean, why go to work? There's no reason to go to work. And this is not to criticize. This is the reality of, we talk about hope, and it's so easy to talk about hope on a Sunday morning when we're all smiling at each other and nobody knows what's really going on in our hearts. It's real. And I'm not, as we begin to talk over just these next few minutes, and we're going to fly through these next few minutes, but I'm not trying to stop this morning and say there is something easy to hope. There is not. To have hope is sometimes a battle that you have to get up and you're going to have to practice. And someone says you have to fake it till you make it. I don't know if that's totally true, but the reality is that we sometimes have to continue to do what we sometimes don't want to do. And as we do it, hope begins to grow. Paul understood this. The Apostle Paul, and I don't know where Paul was at in his life, but the Apostle Paul had to deal with some past in his life that I think he wished he could have forgotten. And I don't know how heavy it weighed upon his mind. But Paul begins to give us some answers on how to continue to have hope when things seem hopeless. Paul does not make it simple. Paul does not come along and simply say, hey, let me pray over you and you will have hope. Paul doesn't simply come and say, hey, have faith. We get used to the Christian cliches, and please, you'll probably hear me say them once in a while too, and I'm sorry, but that's just what we get used to. But Paul understood something about hope, and it comes as a follower of Jesus Christ when we allow God to begin to transform our minds. But how do we do that? I'm going to look at two different ways this morning. As we talk about it, we're going to look at two different things. We're going to look at a practical, I'm just going to be practical with you, some things that I've learned on how to begin to control our mind. And then we're going to look at a spiritual side of things, because life is more than practical. So number one, I want to start with what Paul tells us. How do we begin to transform our minds? In Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, and by the way, I think this is brilliant. Philippians 4:8, Paul begins to tell us something that, by the way, we know. Okay. Paul says this, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. He's been dealing with some other ideas, and he says, but there's one thing I want to end with. The church was beginning to struggle with some persecution. There was a lot of problems that they were beginning to face. And he says, I want you to do one thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. The battle for hope that lies within us is ultimately going to be won or lost in our mind. What we choose to dwell on. Paul knew this. Paul was not a psychologist. Paul simply says, hey, I understand something that you already know. What you allow in, what you think about, what you dwell on, is what you are and what you become. I was recently reading a study by Harvard. Harvard said this. In order to cancel out one negative event, you must have 6 positive events. In order to cancel out one negative comment, you must have 6 positive comments. Think about that a second. How many of our work relationships have 6 positive comments for every negative comment? I was reading, as I was continuing reading about this, they were saying about in the workplace, in high-functioning workplaces, they consider it to be good. There's usually 4 positive to 1 negative. In the average workplace, it's like 2 positive for every negative. And they said the reality is there's so many workplaces that they consider underperforming. If you find underperforming workplace, it's usually like 1 to 1, if you're lucky. In other words, do we wonder why sometimes we struggle with hope? Because what we have to think about, what we dwell on, continues hear negative. By the way, some of us struggle with this by nature. If you're like I am, and you like to listen to the news 24 hours a day, what do you think we actually hear constantly? Do we hear hope? And by the way, news channels are not there to spread hope. They don't want to spread hope because the reality is they spread fear. That's the way we are addicted to fear. I know that sounds funny, but that's the way our lives work. Politics works by playing on fears, not by playing on what is good. It's just the way we work. And I always find it interesting because every time they say, we're going positive, it lasts how long? Because we do not respond to positive, we respond to, guess what we become? Some of us grow up in our lives and we've had people, we've had a teacher, some of you may have had a parent, you may have had someone in your life in the past that said something negative about you. You're never going to amount to much. You're too, and you can fill in the blank. And as we have grown older, sometimes we use that as something to strive. I'm going to prove them wrong. But you know what we continue to replay in our minds? Not though when somebody said, man, you're excellent, I love you, you're amazing. What we replay is you failed. You're not good enough. You're too ugly. You're too bald. You have too much hair. I don't know. We are addicted to the negative. And Paul understood this, and as Paul is looking at us, he says, as followers of Jesus Christ, you have got to change what your mind dwells on. If you're going to be people of hope, you've got to put things of hope in. You want to be transformed? If you want your life to change, if you want to be people who make a positive difference, we need to think about things that are positive. All right. It's easy to say, change the way you think. Put in the good. I'm going to just go real practical. Please, okay, you guys know this, but I'm going to go practical because I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into my life on some of the things that I have learned. And I'm not saying this is going to work for you, but here's some on the practical side. All right. So just bear with me. I'm going to go through this because for me, here's what I've had to learn. When I'm driving in the car, sometimes I have to turn the news radio off. There are things that begin to go, I can't, but what is going on in the world? What is happening? There are times some of us need to stop and just turn it off. For me, here, it's okay. I'm not trying to teach you guys because you guys know what works for you. I'm just trying to say in order for me to begin to control the negative that is going on, this is the practical side. Now, I'm going to go to the other side in just a moment. I've had to be careful of the things that I watch. I find myself lately watching YouTube videos of people traveling through French Alps, restoring furniture. Okay, don't ask my wife because she'll tell you, man, he sits there and watches a guy for an hour repair a watch. Okay. But you know why I do that? Because my mind, my brain needs a break from what is actually negative. I, by nature, am addicted to the news. There's something about who I am that I want to know everything that's going on. And you know what I know? It's not healthy for me. That's who I am. Number two, here's what I've learned. I try to learn from my failures, but I want to replay my wins. Okay. This is not pretending this is spiritual. This is not found in 2 James 3:5. Okay, there's no 2 James. Here's what I've learned. I have had to learn that I am human and I make mistakes. And in my life, I have had to learn from my failures, but you know what I try not to do? I try not to replay my failures. Now, that's easy to say. I am a guy who, like everyone else, is addicted to my failures. And when I lay there at night trying to go to sleep, you know what is going on? And I constantly am learning to change the way that I think. How do I learn? I'm not trying to cover them up. I'm not trying to say they're not there. They are. But how do we not replay them and live in them? How do we replay our wins? Hey, that was amazing. We had the best night. You ever have a good game night with your kids? What a great thing. Replay that. We find ourselves constantly replaying. I did that again. Can't believe it. Learn from it, move on. Let your mind dwell on not your flaws. Learn from it, remember it, but to learn from also your wins. Live in your wins. Number three, I should say. Okay. Not biblical. Don't think you're going to find this in the Bible. It's not. This is just what I've had to learn in my life. Deal with your problems during the day, not at night. This is not Bible. Please, I'm not trying to say this is spirit. Now, there are some biblical references that do kind of give us hints at this, but this is what I've had to learn in my life. You know when you have marriage problems, you know when they come out the most? 10 o'clock at night as you're trying to go to sleep. You know when you've had a problem at work that you need to solve? You know when you think about it the most? 10 o'clock at night when you're ready to go to sleep. You know when there's a guy who's been ticking you off, who's just that neighbor, you know when you think about it the most? 10 o'clock at night when you're ready to go to sleep. This is not a moment, and please hear me out. I'm not trying to say we ignore our problems or we don't try to come up with solutions. I'm just trying to say don't do it at 10 o'clock at night. I have woken up so many times at 1 o'clock in the morning and go, I've found a solution. I've got it. And I'm sitting there and this is brilliant. And I wake up in the morning and I think about it and I go, that is the stupidest thing I've ever read. I can't even believe I even thought that was brilliant. Let it go. Paul said this, whatsoever things are good, honest, just, pure, lovely, things of good report, things that are excellent, think on these things, especially at 10 o'clock at night. I guarantee you this, you cannot solve the problem at 10 o'clock at night. It'll wait till 8 o'clock in the morning, and you can start on it again. We lose hope when we find ourselves at certain situations obsessing over something at a certain time when it's just not the time. I'm going to deal with one more. I'm going to deal with probably the hardest thing that all of us, including myself, find ourselves at. And here's what I'm going to be we're just going to cut through it. Number 4, get help when you need it. The problem is for both Jesus followers and non-Jesus followers, and for both of us for different reasons. For those of us who are Jesus followers, we just think God's spoken to me directly. I don't need help. Can I just say this? There are times when depression hits in, you need medication. I'll just be honest with you. Do not stop and think that if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that's not what we're called to. Get help when you need help. There's times when you need to talk to a friend. There's times when you may need to talk to a counselor. There's times when we need to stop and go get help. I cannot solve the problem. We're at an impasse. We need to move forward. Get help. All of us, especially men, by the way, those of us who kind of a certain sex in here, we know we struggle with asking for help. We are the people who are strong enough, mean enough, bad enough, I don't know what it is. If you need help, if you want to be people of hope, we have got to learn to ask for help when we need help. But I want to be here we go. As followers of Jesus Christ, though, we know this. There is an aspect of hope that is not simply practical. A big part of it is spiritual. Jesus made a statement in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, which I think is important for us to understand. And by the way, most people understand this. Jesus said this, people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. What was he saying? Our lives are more complicated than simply just get medication. Just don't think about problems at night. Just, hey, good YouTube videos on fishing. I mean, it works every time. There is a part of our lives that is tied directly to who God has made us. We cannot deal with hope without stopping and dealing with the reality that there is a spiritual part that God has made us. The practical is important. Trust me, I've learned, and I keep learning, to shift my mindset. It's a constant. Take a deep breath, let it go tonight. I'll deal with it tomorrow. It'll still be there, guaranteed. But there's a spiritual aspect that we need to understand, that God made us more than just this practical, physical world that we find ourselves in. I want to stop. I want to look at three things, and I'm going to move real fast because we're at 11 o'clock. So I'm just letting you know I understand the time. So we're going to move it real fast. But there are three things. There's a spiritual aspect I think we need to remember. Paul tells us that we need to transform our mind. How do we transform our mind in a spiritual way? Okay, I'm going to give you three things. Once again, this is not a quick, easy 3 steps and it's all good. But here's a good start. If you begin to practice this and dwell on these things, think on these things. Number one of the most important things we need to remember is that God loves me. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 19, Paul says this, may you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. Then you will be made complete with all the fullness of life and power that comes from God. Paul is saying when you can understand how much you are loved, when you grasp it, and he says it's too hard for us to fully understand, but when you allow it to change your life, you are loved. I don't always feel very lovable. God loves me. There are times when I look out and I see my neighbor and I don't think he's very lovable. And God says he is loved. When we allow that mindset to set in, I'm not just simply, hey, I'm not a charity case. I am loved. God loved me so much, and I think we sometimes miss the greatness and the vastness of this very phrase to understand that God loved me so much. He came from heaven to pay for the consequences of my sin and your sin. That love is so great, it is so vast, it is beyond our comprehension. You are loved. Number 2, and we're going to go move through this real quickly. Romans chapter 8, verse 1. Not only are you loved, but for those of you who choose to follow Jesus Christ, we are told that we are forgiven. We need to kind of hold on to that mindset. We've made mistakes. In Romans chapter 8, verse 1, Paul reminds us, so now there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ Jesus. Paul reminds us, for those who choose to follow him, we are forgiven. That's a huge word. Our flaws are sometimes so great, and I'm not trying to overlook them, and I'm not trying to say we don't deal with them. I'm trying to say that I am so loved, and God forgives me. Your flaws, I don't know how big they are, but God loves you and he forgives you. I want to look at one more. We're running out of time. We're out of time. Something better to come. We need to hold into our mind. We need to think about things as we kind of change our mindset. Some of this mindset is more than just simply, hey, I need to think about flowers and fishing and trees. And he says, no, stop for a moment. You need to transform your minds. Our minds are more than the physical. It is also, God has made it spiritual. He loves us. He has forgiven us. Number 3, he gives us a hope of a future. Our minds need to hold on to these things because in the middle of the night, when everything is falling apart, we need to hold on to something that is bigger than we are. John chapter 14, verse 2 and 3, he says, there is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I'm coming to prepare a place for you, or I'm going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come again, and I will get you, so that you will always be where I am. Jesus is telling us there is a hope of something better to come. The best way that I like to think about this is when we come to Tuesday night, when we do our summer nights of fun, and we have some awesome food. But it doesn't usually compare to dessert, does it? I might have a sweet tooth. There's something better to come. For those of you who have made a commitment to follow Jesus Christ, there's something better to come. You are loved. You are forgiven. He has promised something better to come. Look, as we talk about learning to have hope, there is a process of learning to flex a muscle that we struggle with. And by nature, it's normal. Life is a few days and it jumps on us, and there's struggles and there's hurts and there's pains. And by the way, the reality is as hard as life is, the majority of your life is still awesome. I know that because the sun is still shining outside. Now, I'm not trying to downplay the struggles we all go through. What I'm trying to say is that we need to get our minds to shift to what we do have, and it is good. I was able to drive here this morning. My car started. It was awesome. I came in, and the air conditioner's working in here. And by the way, it wasn't a couple weeks ago, so I'm really thankful. It's awesome. We know these things. Paul reminds us that your life can be changed by the transformation of your mind in Christ Jesus. Paul reminds us whatsoever things are good, honest, true, noble, pure, excellent. Set your mind on these things. remember, you have a God who loves you, who has forgiven you, who has given you a future if you choose to accept it. Let's bow our heads in prayer.